Hello. So, in this video, I may be covering certain things that I've covered before, but I make this video in the spirit of dialogue and discussion as opposed to confrontation. Um, the title is not intended to be necessarily confrontational, but rather because I would genuinely like to have some understanding or some, let's say, positive exchanges um, on the questions that I want to ask. Um, So here it is. Basically, this is a video directed at moderate feminists. Now, the context of this, what sort of prompted me to make this is I was watching a BuzzFeed Yellow video. I made my views on BuzzFeed pretty clear. I've not much time for BuzzFeed at all. I think it has a very divisive and pretty unpleasant agenda. Um, but the video was about I am a feminist and I'm not, and it's sort of gone through a number of people, men and women from a variety of backgrounds who were describing themselves as feminists and kind of like countering what the stereotypes would be. Things like, I'm a feminist and I'm not a man hater, I'm a feminist and I have a sense of humour, this sort of thing, to counter the stereotypes. And I thought, okay, well, that's very well, but there are certain questions I believe that are legitimate to ask people who associate themselves with feminism as a movement. The first thing I would say is if you label yourself in a certain way, then you sort of it's almost like being a member of a political party. If you label yourself with a certain movement, then when people ask you questions about that movement, you can't really get defensive. And this is something that has been the tendency with I've noticed with a lot of feminists. They tend to get very defensive when negative stereotypes or negative, not even stereotypes, but negative points about modern feminism are put to them. Um, and that's why I associate with being in a political party. If you're in a political party, you get very defensive of the party. You don't like people criticizing it. Well, when feminists hear criticism of feminism, they get very defensive. Now, this is understandable. I would do the same thing probably if I was a feminist. I don't call myself a feminist. I call myself an egalitarian. But egalitarianism isn't really a specific movement in the way that you get feminist lobby groups. It's to me, egalitarianism is more simply an adjective to describe um, principles, whereas feminism can be associated with pressure groups and specific movements. I am aware that it's not a single school of thought. I am aware that there's different tracks within feminism, um, but I'm talking specifically about Western third wave feminism and the movements that are associated with that. So, next point I'd like to make: why moderate feminists? Why not just feminists in general? Well, um, I don't actually believe that all feminists are man haters. I don't believe that for a second. I'm sure there's many people who describe themselves as feminists who are very decent, reasonable people. Um, I'm fully aware that not all feminists are bra burning, fanatical man haters. I know that. But here's the problem. Where there are extremists in the movement, in my opinion, not nearly enough is done to counter them. And when moderates in a movement don't really speak up, at least don't speak up sufficiently, then that does damage the movement as a whole. Um, so the people in that video, for example, may well be reasonable people, but the questions I'm going to ask, I would like people who associate themselves with the term feminism, who would call themselves a feminist, to address these questions directly. And I would very much appreciate if they simply address the questions and not change the subject, because that is the point of the video. It's not about my understanding of feminism or anything like that. I simply want you to address the questions. And if you do me the courtesy of doing that, I would be very grateful. So here are some of the questions. Does a belief in equality, um, does that extend to equal responsibility? Responsibility. So, um, if a woman commits the same crime as a man in the same circumstances, and she is of the same mental soundness and so on, let's just assume man and woman, they're exactly the same age, the same um, mental ability, all the rest of it. So they're the same in everything, but they're one person's a male, one person's a female. Um, should a woman face exactly the same consequences as a man? So, for example, if a man faces a custodial sentence for assault, I know it's different in different countries, but if he faces a custodial sentence for a serious assault that, let's say, leaves someone with a dislocated jaw, should a woman face the same consequences if she leaves her victim with, say, a scar on their face? Let's imagine a scenario where she's had too much to drink, she loses her temper, she gets a glass and slashes someone. Her victim could be male or female, but the point is she's left someone with a slashed face. Should she face a custodial sentence? Yes or no? So that's the first question I want to ask. Um, Now, with each of these questions, I'm going to explain my reason for asking them. And I would appreciate honest answers here. I don't want you to just say what you think I want to hear. I want you to be completely candid in your own opinion on this. Um, I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to sort of vilify your answers, but I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious. I'll come to the other questions in a second, but a little bit more explanation I think is needed here. Um, I'm not asking these questions to provoke controversy or provoke confrontation. I'm asking them because I genuinely don't think that modern feminism has answered these questions. Because whenever individual feminists are pushed on this, they're like, oh, of course, of course. But actually, feminism as a movement, for all the preaching that it does, actually doesn't address these questions. That's why I would like to know the position of individual feminists. So that's the first question: criminal responsibility. Um, and again, the context here is that there has been examples. I don't know about other countries, but in the UK, there was an example of a young woman in, I believe it was the Midlands. She bottled the guy. Um, she escaped with community service. Now, almost certainly, had that been a male thug, he would have been jailed, and in my opinion, rightly so. So, what's your opinion on that? If someone, and I'm not talking about the context of self-defense here, so I'm not talking about women who are defending themselves from domestic violence. I'm talking about simply acts of thuggery, where someone's had too much to drink, and they assault someone for no good reason. Should that person be jailed? Should they face exactly the same consequences as a man? And should they not um, expect any leniency simply because of their gender? So that's the first question. The second question: should people, male or female, be pressured to describe themselves as feminist in order to prove that they have egalitarian principles, i.e., they believe in equality for men and women? Should they be pressured to call themselves a feminist? Um, my context for asking this question is that very, very often I see feminist responses like, oh, well, you don't understand feminism, or you really are a feminist. And that's a little bit patronizing, but in the worst cases, this does descend into outright bullying. Um, I've seen examples of public women actors and so on who have said that they aren't feminists, and the consequence of that has been a bombardment of unpleasant messages from feminists denouncing them for letting down women and this sort of thing. So that's my second question. If someone absolutely believes in egalitarianism, they believe that women are just as good as men, women should have equal job opportunities and so on. Um, is that, in your view, enough? If you're a feminist, is it enough, or do they have to describe themselves as feminist? And if so, why? Why do they have to label themselves? So that's my second question. Why should people label themselves to prove a point? And why is it that, I guess this is an extension of the question, But why is it that anybody who questions feminism in any way and doesn't describe themselves as a feminist, why is that person, especially if they're male, automatically a misogynist? So I guess that's a two-pronged question. Um, why should people be forced to call themselves feminist? And why is it that anyone who dares question feminism automatically a misogynist? I'd like you to address those 2 points clearly, please. Um, and well, I think that is really it for now. Those are sort of the main questions I want to ask. There was another, but maybe it wasn't as important as those ones. Um, no doubt I'll have more questions to ask. I think there are a lot of legitimate questions out there. Oh, well, this is the third question. I think this is an important one. If feminism is really about a true move for egalitarianism, and if moderate feminists or feminists, if you acknowledge that there are issues that disproportionately impact men, because I've seen this a few times when I've raised this point. Sometimes people describing themselves as feminists and say, "Oh, but I agree. I know there's issues that impact men." So if that's your position, if you recognise that fact, should it not be therefore more progressive that there is a gender neutral drive? For example, in politics, would it not be a lot more progressive to have, say, in the case of the UK, a minister for equality rather than a minister for women and equality? Surely it's more progressive to have a neutral position that deals with issues that impact men and women. Such a position would still address women's issues. So my question is, why would feminists be in opposition to that? And again, this is a two-pronged question. If feminism is really about equality, why do feminists actively stand in the way of moves to create awareness about men's issues? Recently in the UK, there was a woman MP who, I forget her name now, but she actually blocked a debate on having a men's or having a recognition in the British Parliament of the International Men's Day, which is already recognised by the UN, I'm pleased to say. So that's again a two-pronged question. Um, in the nature of egalitarianism, would it not be progressive to have gender-neutral forums, gender-neutral ministries, and so on? I'm not talking about MRA positions here. I'm not talking about men's this, men's that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about gender neutral positions. Now, in the nature of being progressive, would that not be better than treating women like charity? Um, and is it not wrong on those occasions when feminist groups do stand in the way of men's issues even being recognised? I'm not saying that you're standing in the way. I'm not saying that all feminists are, but is it not wrong that feminist groups would do that? So just a quick recap of my questions. Should women face equal criminal responsibility? Should should there be a recognition that, or should there be a progressive moves towards gender neutral forums? Should people have to be pressured into labeling themselves as a feminist to prove that they're egalitarian? So those are the questions that I'm putting out there, and I would appreciate if people could just answer those questions directly. I'm not going to answer points that are like, "Oh, what is your understanding of feminism?" Like trying to reverse the questions, because that's kind of counterproductive, and it is not what I'm aiming to do with this video. Um, I put the challenge out to feminists out there, and I'll be very happy to answer questions, but only if my questions are answered. I'm asking this in a respectful way. I'm not being hateful. I'm not, saying feminists are horrible man haters. I'm simply putting out these questions, which I feel are legitimate questions, and I feel that the feminist movement has failed to answer. Questions about equal criminal responsibility, questions about conformity, questions about, well, I mentioned conformity questions about um, gender neutral positions, conformity, gender neutral positions, and first question raised there. Kind of lost my structure a little bit, but I think I've made it clear what I'm asking here. So I would appreciate feedback, um, and please keep it civil because I believe I've been civil in this video. Um, any points or questions kind of reversing it and not addressing my points, I'm going to ignore. And if those are repeated, I'll delete them because I keep my comment section open. But I'm making this video specifically try and get certain questions answered. Because, and this is a sort of caveat to this, I don't believe that all feminists are man-haters. I know that. Some people believe that all feminists are, and I know they're not. So, yeah. Also, I'm not personally opposed to all specific women's rights movements. So, in that sense, am I opposed to all feminism? No. But I am pretty critical of Western third wave feminism in the way it currently is. So, hopefully, I've made myself clear in this video. Hopefully, my questions are clear, and I would very much appreciate some answers. Thank you.